now live on Facebook. We are live on Zoom with our webinar. Good morning, everyone. This is Office Hours. My name is Chris Holmes. I'm the scholar in residence at First Presbyterian Church of Atlanta, and joined by familiar faces to those that have been watching Office Hours for a while. If you have been, you're now live. Nope, not going to do that. So we have Dr. Brennan Breed, who teaches Old Testament at Columbia Theological Seminary, and Dr. Kathleen O'Connor, who for a number of years taught Old Testament at Columbia Theological Seminary, but now just teaches there when they recruit her to, teach a class probably without enough pay and all of that. But does a lot in the world of theological education and the church.
I do have to say, this past year, Kathleen did incredible work. Christine Yoder at Columbia Seminary and I co-taught the Old Testament intro course, which we did fully online because of COVID, which was a big change for us, big shift. And we had 60 some students in the class. It was overwhelming to us. And at the last minute, we asked Kathleen O'Connor if she would help teach the class. And she said yes to teaching online in the middle of a pandemic to 60 students. And those students were so happy. And she took a whole section for discussion. So in any event, all to say, she definitely didn't get paid for the work she did. But we are so grateful that she blessed us and our students with her presence and her wisdom. And we're so grateful that she's taken the time to be here again today. One of the few who has said yes to twice coming on to Office Hours.
Well, I love it because I love the format of us thinking out loud together. That's right. The best part of all this. So thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, amen. Agreed. And I'm so grateful for that too. And over our Lenten study, we didn't have as many takers because it was a busy time of year and everything. And Chris and I talking to each other was not nearly so fun. So thank you for helping us with this.
Thanks, thanks, Brennan. Yeah. I now know how you really feel about me. That's perfect.
Well, it's actually how I feel about myself. That's that's more But in any event, well, thank you so much and for joining us. We are on week 3 of our Psalm study, the Psalms of Lament. This week, we are thinking in terms of the larger sequence or cycle in some ways. We can talk about it, the kind of use of the Psalms in life. Thinking about orientation, disorientation, reorientation. And today we are talking about these Psalms of disorientation that reflect this moment in our lives. So Kathleen, we often begin by asking our guests some of their presuppositions and how they interpret Scripture. We have thankfully already had you on when we talked about Ruth. And you've already shared with us some of your presuppositions and some of your reading lenses and so on. So can we ask you kind of a different question this time? And that's for those who may not be up with Kathleen's scholarship. She has written a beautiful book on Jeremiah, a beautiful book on Lamentations, a 2-part commentary series on Genesis, all of which are beautiful and heartbreaking. It's studying a trauma in a way and using trauma and grief as a lens through which to read these books, which sometimes people will read, especially Jeremiah and Lamentations. They'll just kind of put it down because they're sad. Why would we spend time thinking about sad things or reading sad things, right? Especially for our Christianity in America that is so suffused at times with optimism and so on. So what drew you to studying Lamentations, Jeremiah, Genesis, especially through this lens of trauma and suffering?
Yeah, well, I'd love to tell you I had a very simple, straightforward answer to this. I actually got into this kind of work within our field by my master's degree program when I was required to take a course on Jeremiah. And I read the whole book. And the only part I liked in the book were the first person confessions, so-called confessions or laments of the prophet himself. And I think I liked it at the time because it seemed to evoke human experience. And instead of the attack on the enemies, all the mythic warfare, the violent God, the God of fire and brimstone. If you need a fire and brimstone book, that's the one to go to. So I did a paper on that. Then when I went graduate school, I was working with Dr. Bernard Anderson, and he said, "Why don't you do a dissertation on the Confessions of Jeremiah?" And I said to myself, "Well, I don't know what I will say, but sure, why not?" And so I worked really hard. Now, I have to say that that was just the beginning. It was sort of the groundwork, and I can't say I found myself in that work at all. It was so technical. It was so philological, which is my objection to our field, that's where we leave it. It's my total objection to our field. We leave it there, but not you two. And so then, okay, this is a long story, but so then I'm now working, and I'm working in a school of Catholic foreign mission, which was so formative for me because my students were almost all international students or students in the US of A who are working with justice and peace questions. So the audience in front of me was an audience, many of whom had been traumatized by the South Africa, underground church in China, all the events that were going on in Central America. So, okay, I'm going to make this quicker and say that, so I walked into a school of trauma. And I began to see the text just sort of splinter apart when I tried to find the one true meaning that I was taught to do. So that was the beginning. But then Carol Newsom asked me to write Jeremiah and Lamentations for Women's Bible Commentary. Then John Collins asked me to write for the New Interpreter's Bible. And I did Lamentations for that. And I discovered I had so much more to say. Now, at that stage in my life, I don't know why I had more to say. I didn't know what I had more to say, but I knew that I did. So I would say that I fell into this work, and then it expanded into trauma studies. But here's what I'll say. This almost makes me a Presbyterian, Brennan and Chris, because it seemed providential. Because after this sort of long life I've lived, I see it was my story I was unfolding. But I can't tell you any big dramatic thing except a moment in childhood that might have marked me. And that was that when I was 3 or 4 years old, I was taken to the hospital because they thought I had polio in the day when polio was the COVID thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't have polio, but I remember so vividly I was 3 or 4, and I remember my mother coming to visit and leaving. I remember what she was wearing. I remember the nurse trying to calm me down. I remember screaming my head off, and I remember somebody in an iron lung. And
wow.
That, so subsequently, when babies couldn't have their parents overnight, subsequently, with help of therapists and spiritual directors and all kinds of group things. This is my last sentence, I promise. That the therapist says that imprinted you. And so subsequent events in my life get interpreted through that lens. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I find myself comforted by this awful stuff somehow.
Wow. And
abandonment.
Right. And that it strikes me too, though, that you said when your mother left, you started to cry out. And, there's a lot of impulses in our culture, and a lot of people tell us, grin and bear it, or stiff upper lip, or, but there also fear can sometimes shut us up, leave us without words to say. But that strikes me that Jeremiah models for us that when you go through these traumatic, moments in our lives, and personal and in communal terms, it's not even okay. We have to open up our mouth and let out a cry, right?
Indeed, we have to open up our mouth and let out a cry. And I think we can talk about this at length. There's so many ways it benefits the human being to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Well, can you tell us a bit then? You have spent a lot of time working on not just like in the Bible issues of trauma, but looking at the science, the psychology, the experiential literature that deals with trauma and trauma studies. So how does this actually help us to let it out? Because, some people would say, oh, they're being fussy, or, shut up and recognize how good your life is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the first thing I want to say is the biblical texts I've worked on have hardly been about the individual. Mm-hmm. They are about community trauma. I like the word collective trauma. Mm. Or the phrase collective trauma, or I use the word disaster to get us away from PTSD, though they're related, and though I think the texts really do help individuals. But in our culture, we tend to think this is just me. So it is the ancient Israel has these resources of lamenting and grieving as public acts. And that helps individuals, it helps the community, and it's restorative. And without it, what I think happens is that our grief, our impulses toward revenge and violence, our fury turns inward. It affects personal health. It affects politics. It affects the way people can't thrive unless a resource of this kind, which is ancient and sustained the churches and the synagogues and Islam for centuries. Unless we have these available to us, then we enact the violence against others. We repress the grieving, and we don't thrive as human beings. Yeah. And so
I wonder if there's we've identified, or scholars have identified, these songs of lament. Jeremiah has them, their Lamentations has them, but is there something like a definition or a description of lament, or what lament isn't? I mean, where my mind goes to is complaints. I have kids that sometimes are complainers. I can be a complainer myself. I feel like neighborhood associations on social media are just a place where people go to gripe and complain. And so, what is a lament, or maybe what is lament not? If that is more helpful.
Okay. I don't know how to really answer that, but I love the question. A lament is a complaint. It's a piece of writing, actually. It's a piece of music. It's a public form for complaint. Now, I think, Chris, what you're talking about is complaints that stay up on a certain level of human experience, but fail to take into account the deeper issues of alienation, abandonment, victimhood, all the other, you can make a list here, the oppression in our society. So that those of us who live in fairly safe, secure, I hate the word privilege, but in the privileged world that we're in, we're complaining because our car gets a scratch on it. Okay, well, what's the real issue under having your Porsche have a scratch on it? Well, the issue is so much deeper about human hunger, human desire for connection, for meaning. So I believe in complaining because, as Brennan started us, we live in a culture where complaint is it's a social disruption. Yeah. And it's disapproved, and it forces, as you both are saying, some form of denial. So this is what I think the laments in the Bible can help us do. Even if we don't believe in God, they provide a form in which really deep issues can be expressed and gathered, and just the expression itself, it seems to me, has a healing capacity.
Yeah. I really, one of the things I heard you say in that I really stick with is that we are comfortable complaining at these like lower level issues, and maybe even our tendency to go there is a reflection of the fact that we're not comfortable with exploring our deeper losses, our deeper griefs, our deeper senses of abandonment, collectively and individually, so that, I'll get on Facebook and I will rant about my neighbor. But really, the neighbor is not the issue. There's something much, much deeper that I'm not dealing with.
Yes. And maybe there's something wrong with the community itself, that the neighbor becomes the issue. And there's so many levels in which we can talk about this.
Yeah, but thinking about the Psalms as giving voice or naming some of those deeper things, giving us words and ideas in a way of how to connect the dots, or how to dig deeper and see these symptoms. I mean, it strikes me that in the Psalms you see all these kind of symptoms, right? The person's bones hurt, they're whatever, but there's enemies, but they're so generic, and they're so people, I've seen people try to diagnose the lament Psalms. What if this person had rheumatoid arthritis or something? But that's that seems to be not the case according to many biblical scholars, right? That these things are generic and all of the complaints are kind of mixed together, but then they are all really kind of set at God's feet. Why did you do this, or where are you, or why aren't you helping, right? And that's kind of drawing it to this much deeper level.
Well, yes, and I mean, there are acts of faith, even when they don't have a happy ending. There are acts of faith that God is still active in your life, and that actually, this is probably a theological problem with them, is that they assume God will do something to fix this. So that there's an assumption that God cares, is present, and will help. That's, I think, a modern problem about how God actually interacts in our lives, and in what way divine presence is healing. And so many people tend to think, well, if I pray to God to fix this, God will fix it. Well, there's no guarantee of that at all. So then why do it? Why do it? Well, it's about something so much deeper, about, well, I think, first of all, articulating the suffering and the violence and the anger and the lostness, putting that before God, just saying it seems to me, is a human step toward healing. But I also think what it does is it invites an answer from God that may not represent itself by your getting over cancer, or your bones stopping hurting, or your enemies making some form of reconciliation with you.
Yeah. That's huge. I mean, I just, I kind of can't help but jump to our issues today. I mean, I'm thinking about COVID and a global pandemic, thinking about endemic white supremacy that is, kind of riven through our culture. And, thinking about these large but people often pick these little things to get really upset about, like masks or something,
right.
But oftentimes we don't do that second step of thinking, well, why are these people freaking out about masks? Well, maybe it's because of a sense of abandonment, or a sense of like, whatever. There are these deeper cultural issues that are actually going on.
Right. And it's not only abandonment. I think it's also shaming. I think that in our political world, one of the issues is the sense of shame, whether there's actually been public shaming, the sense of shame that then turns itself into a sort of violent insistence on one's rights and one's own world and one's life in a way that doesn't suit democracy, for example, or community.
It's interesting. That's a really good point. Yeah. And thinking, well, maybe we can think a little bit about the way that shame works or doesn't work in the Psalms too. But can we take a look at a kind of a typical lament psalm, just to like help us get some coordinates on, and then maybe we can jump to some ones that are some of your favorites. But I know that Bill Brown always says that if you're going to look at a lament psalm, you got to start with Psalm 13. And I
think we should. Okay. The whole thing is there. The whole thing is there, and you had suggested that. So
can you walk us through Psalm 13?
I'd like to walk you through it, and I'll give an hour and a half lecture about it. No, I'm trying. Okay, so we love this psalm, we biblical people, because it offers us a very structured way to talk about a big problem that we don't know what it is. Okay, Ad Mati, that's the Hebrew. I like to sound really smart and say Ad Mati. But the thing is, it means how long? How long, O Lord? So this person feels, or the speaker feels that he or she, let's say she, for fun, she's been in this plight for a really long time. Okay, so what's the plight? That God has forgotten her. Okay, then we get 3 more times. How long are you going to hide from me? How long must I bear pain in my, this is so beautiful. How long must I bear pain in my soul, have sorrow in my heart all day long? This person is clinically depressed and feeling deeply abandoned by the deity, by the Holy One. How long? Oh, there's something else going on. How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? That is an example of shame, it seems to me, but it's also an example of feeling overwhelmed by something going on in the community that we don't know, which means we can climb in there metaphorically and find something in our own lives.
Yeah.
We don't have to look, I don't think. But
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, I love that this is a model, right? You guys have already explained that, but that there is the vertical relationship, the human and God relationship. Yep. There is the horizontal, the my neighbor, my enemy is exalted over me, but there's also the self. So like all 3 components of the human psyche are involved in this how long. All
Excellent.
3, every aspect of humanity is sort of enveloped in this lament psalm.
Well, I love what you've said. I want to say something about that. I want to say something about the I in the psalm.
Yeah.
As Americans, the I in the psalm is me and me alone. And it may well be in this prayer, but it's recited in community. It's prayed in community. It's liturgized in community. And so even when it's the I, the singular, it's really the voice of the community in the midst of the community. And I think we so overlook that when we think only of these texts as therapeutic. Yeah. It was our colleague, Brennan Marcia Riggs, who said to me one time years ago that when the African American community prays and they use I, and when they say, who will come? And they say, I will come. They mean that I will come so that we can all be together in a community. It's not me alone. And, that's a modern example. And this is all about 3 verses or 4 verses so far. But I think
that's great though. Yeah.
But I think in our own situation, we are so we're so individually oriented as a community that we don't understand a world where the community is tribal, it's social. The community matters more than the member. The family matters more than the individual. And there are many cultures in our time that live that way, but we don't see the text when we think of it only as me. Yeah. Though, I'll tell you, I got through my life by thinking of it as me. So I don't want to separate them and say they can't be. I want to say they, okay, you get it.
Well, that's great. Yeah.
I like that because we'll talk later about the use of the Psalms of Lament in the life of faith, but sort of reframing that these aren't just about me as an individual can also help us read them when we may not feel this way, right? Like I'm on cloud 9, everything's going right in my life. Why would I read a Psalm of Lament? Because you read it in a part of a community, and you should read it knowing that there are people who feel abandoned, who feel depressed, who feel that their enemy is ruling over them. And that is an act of faith. That is an act of solidarity.
Amen to that. I might as well say, in my early adulthood, for many years, I was a Dominican sister. And when I first joined the order, we were chanting the Psalms 4 or 5 times a day.
Mm-hmm.
And it became so evident to me as this liturgical practice of singing the divine office in English gathered up all the things that were going on in this large community of which I was a member. And so you don't have to be feeling this. You're helping, you're praying for the rest of the community, and you're praying for the world.
Right, right.
And when you are feeling this, the community is gathering you and supporting you and embracing you. And this is, again, represents my background, not only as a Dominican sister, but as a Roman Catholic, where we do Psalms in response to the first reading every single Sunday. We sing them. And sometimes in ways that are not recognizable, but nevertheless, we'd sing them. And so it gets into the psyche, the language, the lilting care for the community through this.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay, so we've gotten through verse 2, and then this is the complaint.
Move on.
And so that's the first part.
Can I just say about verses 1 and 2, this how long? I do love how impertinent this is to say this to God, and how unlike many prayers today this is, where you say, oh God, you are so wonderful, you are so great, I am nothing, I am, it assumes a familiarity that and almost like a rudeness, that I just kind of can't even imagine saying this to like my, Catherine, I mean, how long do I have to sit here and wait for you? That would be, but I just love the faith that it takes to address God like this, right?
Amen. But there's nothing to add to that. That's absolutely right. And it does, the very fact that it is abrupt and rude, that very fact is an indication of the faith that underlies the prayer itself.
Yeah.
And it teaches us how to pray.
Yeah.
It tells us this there.
Mm-hmm.
That God can take it. God expects us to kind of show up with our full selves and not put on a veneer or a facade.
We never have to defend God in the text, even when God is at God's worst depiction, in God's worst representation. We never have to defend that. It's human experience plopped in front of the divine, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm.
Plopped is maybe works here. Okay, should we move on to verse 3?
Yes, please.
We need another hour on these verses. Okay, so first we have the complaint. There's no such thing as a lament without complaints. It teaches us to complain. It also invites us to go deep with our complaint. Right. So then, verse 3 is what we call the petition. Most, but not all, laments ask God for something. And so this person is asking for divine attention, because the first question is, God is hidden from me. My suffering obliterates God, God's presence, the sense of God's presence. So consider and answer me, O Lord my God. So give light, I love this, give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. So, of course, we're not talking about literal light here. We're talking about some understanding. It's a great question. Some understanding of the situation. Give light, or I'm really at the edge of death. It's like a trauma thing. And my enemy will say I have prevailed, so I'll be destroyed by the enemy, or I'll be shamed by the enemy, and that enemy is going to gloat over me. And my foes will rejoice because I'm shaken. Here we go. This is more of a complaint. I'm shaken. I can't go on. I'm dying. Help me. Okay, now, here's my favorite thing about some of these lament psalms. We do a huge switch turnaround. And what interests me is the gap between this long complaint and request to, but I trusted in your hesed and your steadfast love. My heart will rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. Why this shift? Now, I have a lot to say about this, and you might not want me to do it, but let me start.
Please. Yeah.
First of all,
this is great.
I think this is a story of disorientation, to borrow Walter's language from Paul Ricoeur. But I also think it's reorientation. So those three categories that Walter has helped us see how these prayers can help us, they don't fit every text.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to call this a psalm of disorientation because it concludes with a shift. Now, I'm interested, and I have not a thought much about this, I'm interested in how the shift takes place. And there's about 500 answers. I only know one or two. The answers are, okay, I'm going to lapse back into my doctrine, my interfaith world, my catechism. Let's say catechism. I'm going to lapse back into my catechism because I am trying to manipulate God to do what I want God to do. And I think that's a good answer. Some people even suggest that another writer, another prayer, another member of the community couldn't take how hard these comments to God are, so fixes it by adding the last two verses. I don't know if they actually do it with this one, but some scholars do that with Psalms. But I want to say maybe the very act of articulating creates a pause, puts it out there. Maybe the following week, maybe the following year, there's some alteration. Maybe at that very moment, there's some internal shift because this person, allegedly, or I'm going to say, this prayer, this community, has sunk down to the very bottom. They're in their depths. And in that very place, some kind of grace occurs and leads to hope. It leads to the possibility that some new reality is going to occur. And we don't know what that is. But it involves the very thing the person is looking for. You've forgotten me, but I trusted in your love. I'm going to rejoice in your salvation. I'm going to sing. So then when you sing, what you're actually doing if you're actually praying an ancient psalm, when you sing, then you're including the community in yet another way. You're singing. Now, so you're lying on your deathbed or you're lying in a hospital with COVID. And so what does this mean then? It means maybe something as simple as I'm accepting my situation. And that changes everything.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like an evacuation. I have this image as we're talking through this psalm of, it's out there. I've put it out there. And because I've put it out there, I can find myself in a position of trust. It may not mean my situation is better. It may not mean that all of a sudden everything is shiny and happy and, back in Disneyland. But it does mean I have, it is the liturgical act of like going to a temple and making an offer. And this is it. It's at your feet and I'm trusting you to do with it what you will. Which just seems, just seems so true to worship and the experience of it's a cost. Like there's a cost of emptying yourself of this experience.
Yes.
Then to say, and I have trusted in you.
Right. And here's where the ad mati, the how long, really matters, because this could be a person suffering for a really long time and it doesn't change. But the prayer is a prayer of clinging to the Holy One, clinging. And it's extremely powerful, I think.
So in a way, almost like being faithful and really embracing lament, not as a surface complaint, but as this process of going deeper and naming the deepest of all of our desires, emotions, our communal issues.
And our grief, yes.
Yeah. And the process of going through that might be itself healing, like might itself lead you to a feeling of salvation, even if everything didn't get fixed.
Right. Or a feeling of salvation or a sense that that as bad as it is, this is your reality now, and live it, even if you're going to die soon. And there's confidence that God is with you.
Yeah.
Whether that's so or not, they don't know.
Yeah. So being faithful to the lament transforms us in a way, or at least can.
It does. I think.
And so this is the basic structure of a lament song, like getting God's attention.
Yes.
Yeah, getting God's attention, saying, "Hey, here's my complaint," asking for something, a petition. What do you want? Well, I want God to fix this, right?
Right.
This kind of and then this amazing shift to praise. Now, do all lament psalms end up with this shift?
Of course
to
not.
praise?
Of course not. There are several that don't. I think you gave me a list of numbers that don't. I think there are.
I mean, it's Psalm 88 is where I go to typically, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, they don't all. And maybe we should observe that of the whole book of Psalms, over a third of them are laments. So this is a practice in the ancient world that was accepted and needed. So, okay, do they all end in happy ending? No, they don't. And I can't remember which ones don't. But I want to say that the book of Lamentations has very little happy ending in it. Now, may I go to this?
Yes, yeah, please.
Okay, so the book of Lamentations, which is really the focus of my work more than the Psalms, but the book of Lamentations is a set of laments that are highly formed. They're very literary. You play with the alphabet. You already know all this, but one of the aspects of it that I think is most important is that the book doesn't have a happy ending. And the reason it doesn't is because there are 5 speakers writing in these poems, and all of the speakers more than once ask for God to see them and see their devastation, their humiliation, the destruction they've undergone. And God never answers. And the only hope in the whole book, I think, is in the middle, chapter 3. And I describe this character in chapter 3 as a imprisoned soldier, the Geber, the one whose job is to defend the community, the male, whose job it is to defend the family and the community. He's tortured. He's a tortured victim. And in the middle of that, he leaps toward the only thing anybody pays attention to in Lamentations: your mercies are new every morning. But when you look at that chapter 3 closely, this speaker lapses back and forth, mostly ending in hopelessness. And then the book itself ends in hopelessness. Restore us to yourself, O Lord, says the community. Restore us to yourself, O Lord, unless you have completely turned against us.
Jeez.
That's how the book ends. And so why is this in the Bible? It seems to me it's the benefit of no response. It's the benefit of not having a quick turnaround. It's the benefit of having your suffering held up in front of you as a people. So this is trauma theory, so that you can see what happened to you. Now, that sounds crazy, but if you have experienced collective trauma or individual trauma, the real issue is trying to speak the unspeakable. You can't. This is Holocaust theory. Also, you can't say it. It's so beyond saying, and yet you have to say it. You have to move through it. You have to see it. And then, of course, in the longer theory, you need a new narrative. You need your narrative to expand hugely. But the Bible in Lamentations doesn't do that. And the Psalms that don't move toward a happy ending don't do it either. And I know I'm very psychoanalytical in my work, and I try to draw on sociology and so forth. But as Psalms to be recited in the community, to know I'm not alone in this. We all, and we don't see anything. We're in such blindness about the meaning of our lives.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people say that, something like, I heard someone else say, complain about this, or name this thing that they were struggling with, that they were grieving, that they were, and that like, I realized I wasn't alone. I realized I wasn't the only
Right.
one. And it seems to be a huge moment for a lot of people.
Yes, yes, yes. COVID, of course, through COVID even, or especially maybe I should say right now. COVID.
Yeah.
Well, and it strikes me that what you just said about Lamentations, and that our biblical witness has this, and it doesn't have a happy ending, really. It doesn't have the turn of praise. And again, just one of the reasons why I love talking about the Psalms of Lament and Lamentations is because it is something that I find to be so absent in our culture. We are not good at this. Especially in Christian circles, we are not good at allowing people just to sit in despair without giving them, a silver lining of the cloud, or it's going to be better, or, just tough it out. Like we always want, the language of a quick therapy, a quick solution, and to know that Lamentations, and just to read Lamentations, not with, the joy of 2nd and 3rd Isaiah or the new creation that we see, but just to sit with it is such, I think that would be a challenge to many people of faith. It would make them uncomfortable to be in that level of discomfort and dissatisfaction.
Right. Like imagine churches where people could come in and sit in the pew and just cry. And imagine the shame that would be in some churches. I have to say, I've said before, I attend an African-American community, and it happens. And people just receive it because there's a different experience underneath it. So what is it about not being able to face it? Is it our sense that we are in control, and therefore we must control, and we must be closed down achievers?
Yeah. And I think, within the context of white, Christian, American context, probably, I get the sense that we want quick fixes. We're can-do people. Maybe naming some problems is a big deal, but let's fix it. Let's or God's going to fix this immediately, or whatever. And it seems like it's a failure. Right? It feels like a failure, and probably that person didn't pray right, or they didn't live right, or they just if it doesn't get fixed pretty soon.
Right.
I love that idea at the end of Lamentations, but also of the boldness of saying, like, maybe you have rejected us forever.
Right.
Did you? And just leaving the question.
Yeah. Of course, in the ancient world, there were other options. There were like the Babylonian deities around that you could turn to when you've forgotten us. So maybe we should go there. But it's a shocking thing that it's in the Bible. That's the thing. It's shocking.
Yeah. But it seems like it's an important.
Well, okay. So let me point out one more thing. So in the lectionary, I don't know which lectionary, but I'm doing something next week about Lamentations, and because it's a lectionary thing, the only text that the text that we're talking about is the happy text. It's
3.
The mercies are new every morning. So of course I'll talk about more than that, but it's so interesting that the lectionary correct collectors, I don't know which one.
I wrote something for Working Preacher that'll be up this summer, and I draw heavily on your work and cite you, but it's about Lamentations 2, I think. But I draw a lot on your book, and especially your theology of witness, right? The witnessing to suffering seems to be this core issue of Lamentations, but also of the Lament Psalms, I would say too, of witnessing to one's own suffering, witnessing to the suffering in the community, being a witness to someone else's suffering, like being there and actually looking at them, being present with their suffering, which we tend to turn away from, and so on. Right? Is that so?
Absolutely. Everybody, at least trauma theory says, when you've been so overwhelmed by the experience of violence, it takes away your ability to speak about it. It takes away your ability to really remember it. So you need it shined back to you, but not directly, rather indirectly. Because if you do it directly, you're going to be re-traumatized. So I project that onto the community. and believe that that's what Lamentations is doing and Jeremiah is doing. It's offering them a way to see what happened to them. Lamentations does not try to re-narratize it. Parts of Jeremiah do. But in order to have human dignity, for individuals at least, to be seen deeply in your suffering and accepted instead of talked out of it.
Right.
There was a study at Yale, a study at Yale in which Lantzman, I can't remember the name, did videos of Holocaust survivors being interviewed by people who were trying to do history and understand, and not long after, and he noted that the interviewers were trying to talk them out of the depth of their pain and give them a happy ending. It's just like astonishing. So.
Wow. That doesn't seem helpful.
Can we look at 137?
Yeah.
Yes.
Really
So these Psalms of anger and rage. Yeah. So some people look at these Psalms and some of these Psalms of lament, and they expect to see someone saying, "Oh God, you're so great. I'm so little. I'm so sorry." But they oftentimes don't get that, right? We get people's unfiltered rage, and you know who filters it is the lectionary, right? I mean, Psalm 137 verse 9, "Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rock." That's oftentimes not sung. It's not, if you sing the Psalms, it's oftentimes kind of cut out. But why would this be in the Bible? Psalm 137. This happy are people who bash babies' heads in.
I bet you have an answer to that.
I mean, I got one, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think when we cut that out, we have a failure of imagination. First of all, to imagine, so this is a community that's now in captivity in Babylon. They've lost everything from their land. They've been dragged around the desert, and they're now living in Babylon. And we know that later things work out a little better for them. But at the beginning, they're furious because they sit down and they weep, and they hang up their musical instruments as if now we have a psalm that shouldn't have any music to it.
Mm-hmm.
They hang up their musical instruments because the people who brought them there, their oppressors, are asking them to sing their music. We know about that cultural experience, don't we? And
Mm-hmm.
they ask for entertainment. Sing us one of your songs. But they now ask the question, how can we sing? They're asking each other, how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? And then they put a curse on themselves. If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand wither. This is such a good curse. May my right hand wither, and may my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. That means you have no water and no food. That means you're in starvation mode. If I forget my homeland, if I forget my land and my people. So if I do not set Jerusalem as my highest joy. So now it turns from this complaint, not directed to God. Only now do we get in verse 7 an attention to God. Remember the people. Now the Edomites, people don't know this, but Edomites are neighbors who help the Babylonians attack the people of Israel, Judah, in the big catastrophe. So, and the Edomites are getting quoted here. The enemies are getting quoted. They said, tear it down, down, just raze the city to the ground. And then now here's the part that nobody can deal with. Oh, daughter Babylon, the oppressor, you devastator. Happy will they be who pay you back what you have done to us. Happy, here's the really bad part. Happy shall they be who take your little ones and dash them against the rock. So here you don't have a turn to happiness. You don't have a turn to praise. You have a request that God will enact your revenge.
Yeah.
Now, we can't ever say that in church because we're teaching revenge is what people think. I think the opposite. I think opening up this inner violence that if you can't imagine an army coming in and killing men, women, and children, if you can't put yourself in the place of Palestinians and Jews, then you can't understand the desire for revenge. Your whole future, your whole life, your whole identity as a people is in danger of being eradicated. Yeah. And you're supposed to just say, okay, God, that's fine. But there's one more point to it that matters a lot to me, is that they don't think they're going to go do the revenge. They're asking God to take revenge. And so what would happen if you read this in church and understood that and were able, if you sang it, and people were able to understand these human experiences.
Yeah. And so this is that sharing our rage with God and kind of like justifiable rage. I mean, and it says, verse 8, happy shall they be who pay you back what you have done to us. And then there's the stuff about the bashing babies' heads, which implies to me as a reader, the Babylonians bashed babies' heads against the rocks.
Indeed.
And so if someone attacks my kids, I mean, I'm going to be, what kind of parent would I be if I wasn't full of rage and anger and if what kind of human would I be if I didn't have the thought that went through my head and probably obsessed over, I want to get them too, right? Get them back.
Of course. So, I don't know how we can use this in church, but I can see how it would benefit in a church. Mm-hmm. I can see how in a community of worship, this has a place if it's given some context, if it's
right.
And
we don't want to do this, but we want to express to God the truth of our feelings, which, right. If we've gone through a traumatic experience, oftentimes there is rage that's a part of it. And if we don't let it out, what else are we going to do with it? Sublimate it, turn it inwards, or, it's going to ruin us, right? If we don't let it out, but we're letting it out to God and not telling each other, let's go get them in a way. Is that right?
So we know this is not recorded as it's happening. What's terribly interesting is that it's a liturgy for later.
Yeah.
It's a liturgy of memory, but it's also a liturgy about the devastation in the community. And then it takes on so much more meaning through history. And I think, we just look at the news today and we see, if you just look at Israel and Palestine and the horrible revenge that goes from one side to the other, and the larger political issues are lost. The larger geopolitical questions are lost in this desire, this understandable desire for revenge. Because if you kill my child, boy, get out of my way. Here I come.
Yeah, and voicing that and handing it over to God is probably a better way than trying to attack. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
It strikes me that I think we talked about this with Brent a couple weeks ago, but just the idea that you have to go through emotions. Like you can't stop them early. You can't bottle them up. You can't ignore them. That if we think about stress, if we think about depression, if we think about grief, there's a cycle of going through it. And the same would probably be the case with rage and anger and retribution. And that by liturgizing this rage, that's a mechanism for going through it, for moving through it, to not maybe not to get rid of it, but to move through it. We can name it, we can express our desire for retribution, and maybe that expression becomes a replacement for the actual deed. And maybe there's a movement through that emotion as a result.
Yes.
Now, can I ask us? I just want to make sure we have time to look at Psalm 130, which you said, Kathleen, was one of your favorites, and
it is one of my favorites.
And it's a little bit different. It's not an expression of rage, but it is a lament.
It's a lament, and it's a lament it's a lament. Okay, so this is important to me because when I was a Dominican sister, this was what we call one of the penitential psalms, because it does rarely for laments, it does talk about personal sin or guilt or somebody's guilt anyway. But the language, out of the depths I cried to you, was sung during the Lenten season. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. So what are the depths? We don't know. We have no idea. Is it the depths of my suffering, my soul? Is it some horrible large catastrophe? But it's a person who is overwhelmed by something. So out of the depths I cry, hear my voice, let your ears be attentive to my requests, my supplications. So the first thing is about if you pay attention to my sinfulness, O God, nobody can stand in front of you if you pay attention to sinfulness. Sinfulness doesn't really matter because God, if God paid attention to it, there wouldn't be any future. But with you is forgiveness. And why? Why does God forgive? According to this psalmist, it's so that we'll praise God, so that we'll revere God, respect God, know who God is. But here's
I love that about the Psalms, like Psalm 6, like Psalm 6 and Psalm 13, like other Psalms too, like that say something like this, where it's like Psalm 6, I love it, where it says, if I die, who's going to praise you?
right.
And it takes some gumption to say this to God, right? I mean, but it shows like, if you're serious that I'm made in your image and that you love me and you care for me and you chose me, well, then help me, right?
Right. Exactly. But here's the part that I love the most. It's 5, 6, and following. Because of the Hebrew words here, I wait for the Lord, my soul waits. Okay, so the word for wait is it is a word that can mean to wait eagerly, to hope for. And so wait. And in his word, I hope. So there's play on these two Hebrew words that really mean the same thing. And they suggest that hope will come if you wait. And we can offer that in light of what we already talked about, what Chris was just saying. If we can go through this, if we can go through this process of whatever the depths are, then presumably, theoretically, God will be there. There's hope because my soul waits for the Lord. So my whole soul hopes for the Lord more than those who watch for morning, more than those who watch for the morning. These are we think these are the night watchmen around the cities, and they're the security guards of today who sit there all night long, get up, walk around, sit down, probably several around a city gate, around a walled city, and they look out into the desert or the town or the fields. And it's so boring, and it's never going to end, and it's getting colder and colder. But any minute, danger could happen. So the people praying here are like these watchers. They're watching. They're waiting for the Lord to come. And that's a hard thing to do in a community that's all praise. It's not happening right now. So anyway, so then. The person or the individual who's speaking here then turns toward the community and embraces the community. This isn't just about me.
Right.
This is about the whole community. O Israel, hope in the Lord. Why? Now we get a theology. Because this God who is filled with forgiveness is also filled with that wonderful untranslatable word, hesed. And this is the God who will redeem. And it is God who will redeem Israel from all its iniquities. So you're safe. You're fine. All is well if you can wait.
Yeah.
And waiting is hoping in this case. So why is that a penitential psalm? Why is it a liturgical piece used year after year at liturgical services? Because it seems to gather up the condition of the community.
Yeah. Yeah, the community itself is I mean, in a way, trying to cultivate that ability to wait and hope.
Yes.
And I love too that that untranslatable word chesed there, because we're waiting still. Like when we finish this psalm, we're still waiting.
Right.
And God's loyalty or covenant loyalty or fierce love, however you want to translate chesed. We haven't seen it quite yet, but we have faith that it's there. And it's kind of that's what's holding out for us. And in a way, this prayer you could say it's a little bit like, hey, God, remember that you love us so much and you care for us so much. We're waiting. We're going to keep waiting for that, right? Kind of remind, maybe like a little nudge, God,
Well,
remember that?
And here's another instance where we move from disorientation to a reorientation. So that language of this is just about disorientation doesn't work for me anymore. Though our beloved colleague, Walter has really shown us how these psalms can work, as a body. But
But they're all about movement, moving. They don't sit in one place. They're about moving you to another place.
yes.
Over a period of time, and kind of even hoping to move to another place. Yeah. So I like that it's not a static 3-part cycle or something,
Right.
but it's naming the motion, the movement.
And you don't necessarily get there.
Yeah.
Well, and I just love that turn, what you said, Kathleen, about the turn to the community and that reminder of steadfast love and great power to redeem. Again, there's an authenticity that comes in the first 4 verses that says, we can be honest about our lives, our struggles, our needs, our failures. But then the reminder that, this is one of those places that I go and say, the love of God never fails. Like that yes of God's has said, that yes of God's redeeming power is greater than pandemic. It's greater than bodily illness. It's greater than depression and social fabrics that are falling apart. And just to welcome people and remind them of that embrace. Again, not to bash on any traditions, but I think Christianity would look different if we always led with that. If we always led with great is God's hesed and redeeming and power to redeem, rather than, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, God's going to come at you with a sledgehammer. And just could be a different tone.
It would be a different tone. It would also be politically a different tone. If we have time to keep talking, I know we're going over time. If we could listen to the laments of our sisters and brothers of color in our community. We can't. Shame, control. It's just, if those laments, if the complaints of the community could be heard, there's a new way hope could be born, it seems to me, in our community.
And you're right that it seems like closing down, shutting down the complaint itself is a preoccupation of many, especially white Americans, right? That the kind of they get triggered in a way, or whatever you want to talk about that, but like this kind of worry, this the anxiety that comes up when concerns are voiced. Even the term Black Lives Matter, and like the way that seems to make people very anxious and upset, worried, right? Because now we're going to hear it or something like that, right? But instead, if people listened faithfully to the laments of others in the community, that would be a radical transformation.
And in families, even.
Yeah. Ooh, can you say more about that? So, like within families themselves, you mean like just people listening to each other in families?
Yes.
Yeah.
And listening to complaints and inviting them. I mean, because the bifurcation of society and family and the personal and the political, that has to soften.
Yeah.
But that's probably a whole other conversation.
Yeah. Well, I love that we are ending with lots of conversations to pick up on later, and hopefully someday soon we can have you back on and follow some more of those trails.
You're going to keep going? You two are amazing.
Oh no, yeah. Well, this might be a good time to mention that we're going. This is the end of the next week is going to be the end of our Psalm study. We're going to have Bill Brown on to talk about Thanksgiving Psalms and kind of wrap up on the whole. And we're really looking forward to that. And we will have some changes in the future. Office Hours will take a little hiatus. Chris, do you want to kind of throw some ideas out there just for what people might be looking to in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we're still looking to the fall. Obviously, the CDC guidelines, this came out this week, are indications of we're moving back to a place where in-person worship in the fall is probably more of a reality for a lot of the people who have been watching us for the last year. And so I think Brennan and I are anticipating some more Sunday morning responsibilities, and so we're doing the cost benefit of the value of a live session, seeing these comments show up on Facebook in the moment, versus perhaps doing something that is recorded earlier in the week and then released on Sunday, because we may not have the ability to be live every Sunday morning. I think that Brennan and I have plans for short studies, maybe even some more thematic studies that we would do once a month about what they're saying about a certain topic related to biblical studies or theology. And so, yeah, we'll, all of this is just to get you all very excited about what the fall will look like. It's vague enough to hopefully keep the interest. But Brennan and I have really enjoyed this, and we know that a lot of other folks have as well. So as we navigate this shift back to fall 2021, we're trying to do so wisely.
You're doing what I think people in our field need to do, and you're doing it in a most original way during very hard times. And I thank you. I think our talking to ourselves about technical matters is deadly. So I really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank
you.
We
appreciate you so much, and thank you again for coming back. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Okay, thank you both.
All right,
thank you so
thanks
much,
everyone.
See you well.
Peace, y'all. Thanks.
Bye.